They say time is the greatest teacher, but only if you're willing to listen. Funny thing is, most of us don't start listening until life has already handed us its fair share of bruises. When you're young, you're convinced you have time to figure it all out. Then one day, you blink, and 70 years have passed. What used to keep you up at night suddenly feels so small, and the things you once thought mattered, they don't, not in the way you believed they did. And that's the secret. Most of what steals your peace isn't worth carrying. It never was, but you don't realize that until you've spent decades holding on to things that should have been left behind long ago. Before we get further, I'd like to know where you're joining us from. And if you find any value in these reflections, a like and subscribe would mean a lot. It helps keep these conversations going. And who knows, someone out there might need to hear this today just as much as you do. Now, if you want peace in your later years, real peace, the kind that lets you sleep soundly at night, breathe deeply in the morning, and look back without regret, there are 3 habits you need to let go of. Not next year, not tomorrow, now. And we'll start with the first one, the one that poisons more souls than anything else, the habit of holding on to resentment. Resentment is a slow poison, not the kind that takes you down in one dramatic gulp, but the kind that seeps into your bones, little by little, until one day you wake up feeling heavy, bitter, and exhausted from carrying a past that no longer exists. It starts small. A disagreement here, an unfair moment there. Someone wrongs you, and instead of letting it go, you tuck it away. Maybe you tell yourself you've moved on, but deep down you haven't. You keep replaying the situation, the words, the unfairness of it all. Years go by, and those tiny pockets of resentment start adding up. A friend who betrayed your trust, a family member who disappointed you, a stranger who said something cruel. You carry it all, thinking it somehow protects you, thinking it makes you wiser or stronger, but it doesn't. All it does is weigh you down. Let me ask you this. Has holding on to resentment ever changed what happened? Has it ever undone the hurt? Has it ever made you feel lighter, happier, or more at peace? The answer is always no. And yet, we do it. Because there's a part of us that believes if we let go, we're letting them off the hook. That forgiveness means forgetting. That releasing resentment means the other person wins. But here's the truth. You don't forgive for them. You forgive for you. You see, peace isn't something that just shows up one day, wrapped up in a neat little box. It's something you create. And you can't create peace when your hands are full of old battles. I once knew a man, let's call him Harold. By the time he was 70, he was the kind of person who had a permanent scowl on his face, always ready to tell you how the world had done him wrong. He'd list off old grudges like they were badges of honor. His ex-wife, his old boss, his neighbor from 30 years ago, who borrowed his lawnmower and never returned it. You'd think he was talking about things that happened last week, but no. These were decades-old wounds he refused to let heal, and it showed. It showed in his health, in his posture, in the way his face was etched with lines not of wisdom, but of bitterness. Then there was Margaret. Same age, same town, similar life struggles. But Margaret laughed easily. She had an air of lightness about her. She had lost people she loved, been hurt in ways that could have made her bitter, but she wasn't. And when I asked her why, she said something that stuck with me. I decided a long time ago that my peace was worth more than my pain. That's what it comes down to. You can keep watering the weeds of resentment, or you can start planting something new. You can choose to carry the weight of the past, or you can put it down. So how do you do it? How do you let go of resentment when it feels justified? When it feels like the only thing keeping you tethered to what happened? First, remind yourself of this. Resentment is a prison where you hold the key. The person who hurt you? They've probably moved on. They're living their life. Meanwhile, you're the one still chained to the past. Let that sink in. Second, practice release, not reconciliation. Forgiveness doesn't mean inviting toxic people back into your life. It doesn't mean pretending what happened was okay. It simply means you refuse to let it define you anymore. Write it out, speak it aloud, do whatever you need to do, but make a conscious choice to stop carrying it. And lastly, focus on what's ahead. When you're 70, you don't have time to waste on old wounds. Every day is a gift, a chance to wake up and choose peace over pain. If something happened 10 years ago, let it stay there. Because the only thing resentment gives you is more of the same. You've already spent years carrying it. Try putting it down and see how much lighter life feels. That's the first habit you need to leave behind if you want peace in your later years. And trust me, the next one is just as important. There's something strange about getting older. The things you once thought were important start to blur, and the things you ignored suddenly become clear as day. You start seeing patterns, how the same mistakes, the same worries, and the same habits keep repeating, not just in your life, but in everyone's. And if you're paying attention, you realize something. Most people are trapped in their own minds, not because of what they've done, but because of what they keep fearing will happen. We've already talked about resentment, how holding on to past wounds poisons the present. But if resentment is about the past, then this next habit is about the future. And it's just as damaging. The habit of constant worry. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Worrying is just part of life. You have to think ahead. It's responsible to be concerned. Sure. But there's a difference between thinking ahead and living in fear of what's ahead. And a lot of people, especially by the time they hit 70, have spent their entire lives worrying about things that never even happened. You see it everywhere. The person who can't sleep at night because they're worrying about things out of their control. The person who never truly enjoys the good moments because they're already stressing about what could go wrong next. The person who second guesses every decision because what if they make the wrong one? The truth is, worry is like paying interest on a debt you don't even owe. It keeps you restless, uneasy, always waiting for something to go wrong. And for what? Here's the part nobody tells you. No matter how much you worry, life will still unfold the way it's meant to. The unexpected will still happen. The things you fear will either come to pass or they won't. But either way, worry won't change a thing. It just steals the joy of what's happening right now. I remember an old friend of mine, Robert. He was the kind of man who worried about everything, his health, his money, his family, even the weather. If there was something to stress about, he'd find it. And one day, after years of knowing him, I asked, "Robert, how many of the things you worried about actually happened?" He paused, thought about it, and then he laughed. Not because it was funny, but because in that moment, he realized the truth. Almost none of the things he had spent decades worrying about had actually come true. He had spent all those years in fear of things that never even happened. That's how worry works. It takes your peace, your time, and your energy, and in return, it gives you nothing. And yet, people hold on to it as if it's helping them. But here's what I've learned. Worry doesn't prepare you for the worst. It just robs you of the best. Now, let's be clear. There's a difference between planning for the future and being consumed by it. A wise person prepares, but a worrier suffers twice, once in their imagination and again if the thing actually happens. So how do you let go of the habit of constant worry? First, understand what's in your control and what isn't. If it's something you can fix, then fix it. If it's out of your hands, then worrying about it is just an illusion of control. It's wasted energy. Second, focus on what's real. Worry lives in the land of what if. But peace? Peace lives in the present. Next time your mind starts spiraling into worry, stop and ask yourself, is this happening right now? Or is this just my imagination running wild? Most of the time, you'll realize it's the latter. And third, remind yourself how much time you've already wasted on worry. Think back to all the nights you spent anxious over things that never even happened. Do you really want to spend whatever time you have left doing the same thing? There's a reason older folks who find peace are the ones who've learned to let go. They know that the clock keeps ticking, whether you worry or not. And at some point, you have to decide, do you want to spend your days anticipating the worst or actually living? You've made it this far. You've survived everything life has thrown at you. And in the end, worry didn't help you. It only drained you. Don't let it steal the years you have left. Now, we've covered two habits that need to go: resentment and worry. But the third one? That one's a little trickier, because it's not something people always recognize. It's a habit that sneaks in slowly, disguising itself as something harmless, even reasonable. And by the time you realize it, it's already drained years from your life. There's something you start to realize when you get older. The biggest regrets in life aren't about things you did. They're about things you didn't do. Not the mistakes you made, but the moments you let slip by. The conversations you never had. The opportunities you ignored. The people you pushed away, thinking you'd have more time. But time, as you come to understand, isn't something you can bargain with. We've already talked about resentment and worry, two habits that steal peace from the past and the future. But this one steals your present. And the sad part is, most people don't even realize they're doing it. The habit of isolating yourself. Now, this one is tricky, because isolation doesn't always look like loneliness. Sometimes, it looks like independence. Like, I don't need anyone. Like, I'm fine on my own. And sure, there's a certain strength in being self-sufficient. But let me tell you something. There's a difference between being independent and being alone. And far too many people, as they get older, start pushing the world away without even meaning to. It starts small. You get tired of certain conversations. Maybe you've been hurt by people before, and you don't want to go through it again. Maybe you tell yourself, people are too much trouble, so you stop reaching out. You stop accepting invitations. You stop picking up the phone. And before you know it, the world gets quieter. Too quiet. At first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. You tell yourself you like the peace. But there's a difference between peace and silence. And one day you realize something. It's been a long time since someone really asked how you were doing. A long time since you sat across from a friend and laughed about something ridiculous. A long time since you felt like you belonged somewhere. And that's when it hits you. You didn't just lose people. You let them go. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. People change. Friends drift. Family gets busy. And that's true. But too often we let isolation become a habit instead of a choice. We let it happen without even questioning if it's what we really want. I knew a woman named Eleanor. Strong, smart, independent. She was the type who prided herself on not needing anyone. She'd say things like, I don't need friends. I'm too old for drama. I like my peace. And for a while, that worked. Until it didn't. Because when the days got long and the nights got quiet, when the birthdays came and went without calls, when the holidays felt more like reminders of who wasn't there, she realized something. She had spent so much time keeping people out that she had no one left to let in. The hardest truth about isolation? By the time you realize you're lonely, you've already been alone for a long time. And that's why, if you want peace in your later years, you need to break the habit of pushing people away. So how do you do it? First, reach out before you need to. Don't wait until loneliness sets in. If you think of someone, call them. If someone invites you somewhere, say yes. Connection isn't about big, dramatic reunions. It's about small, consistent moments of showing up. Second, stop waiting for others to make the first move. A lot of people sit around saying, nobody checks on me. But ask yourself, When was the last time you checked on someone else? Friendships, relationships, connections, these aren't things you have, they're things you build. And lastly, understand that connection isn't about quantity. It's about quality. You don't need dozens of friends. You don't need to be the life of the party. But you do need people in your life who see you, who care about you, who remind you that you're not walking through this world alone. You can spend your years isolated, or you can spend them connected. And trust me, life feels lighter when it's shared. Now, we've talked about 3 habits that steal peace, resentment, worry, and isolation. But before we wrap this up, there's one last thing you need to know. If you've made it this far, then something in this conversation has resonated with you. Maybe you've seen yourself in these words. Maybe you've felt the weight of resentment, the anxiety of worry, or the loneliness of isolation. Or maybe, just maybe, you've realized something even deeper, that peace isn't something you find, it's something you choose. And now that we've talked about what to leave behind, let's talk about what to carry forward. Because letting go of these habits isn't just about removing negativity. It's about making space. Space for joy, for meaning, for the kind of life that doesn't just feel peaceful, but whole. So, if you're serious about peace, here's what you need to hold on to. First, choose presence over the past and the future. You've lived long enough to know that time doesn't slow down for anyone. But how many moments have slipped through your fingers because your mind was somewhere else? Worrying, regretting, replaying conversations that don't matter anymore. Enough. It's time to stop living in the past and fearing the future. Right now, this moment is the only thing that's real. Pay attention to it. Let yourself be here. Not where you were. Not where you think you should be. Here. Because peace doesn't come from fixing the past or controlling the future. It comes from accepting now. Second, nurture the relationships that matter. If there's one truth that stands the test of time, it's this. Life is better when it's shared. So don't wait. Pick up the phone. Make the visit. Apologize if you need to. Forgive if you can. And if someone reaches out to you, don't push them away. Don't let pride or stubbornness rob you of love and connection. The people in your life won't be here forever, and neither will you. Make it count. And lastly, stop waiting for peace to just happen. Create it. You don't get peace by accident. You don't wake up one day and suddenly feel light, free, and whole. You build peace, just like you build anything else. By choosing what to hold on to and what to let go. By deciding that your energy is too precious to be wasted on anger, stress, or loneliness. By making small choices every single day that add up to something greater. Because at the end of it all, when you take your last breath, you won't care about the things you once worried about. You won't care about the arguments that seemed so important. You won't care about the fears that kept you up at night. You'll care about whether you lived fully, whether you loved deeply, whether you let yourself experience the simple, quiet moments of joy that were always there, waiting for you to notice them. So don't wait for peace to find you. Go create it. Now, before we close this conversation, I want to hear from you. What's one thing you've learned about peace in your own life? What's a habit you've had to let go of? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your side too. And if this message spoke to you, if it made you pause and reflect, let me know. Because conversations like this, they matter. And sometimes, the right words at the right time can change everything.